Welcome to the radiator replacement project. So we've got a 2000 Mazda Miata. It's got about 60,000, little over 60,000 miles on it. And the symptoms of the car are that we don't see a coolant leak at all. What we do is we can smell it. We can't see any other evidence of a leak at all. In that circumstance, what I did is I went down to the parts house and I rented a pressurization tool for the cooling system. And I've actually installed that. And here's like some of the bits and pieces that come along with it. And then the main rig is right here. And it'll fit multiple cars. It allows you to add pressure to the cooling system, and it also allows you to pressure test the radiator cap. So let's take a look, and I'm going to pressurize this right now and show you what we found. So zoom in down here, and this radiator is actually plastic. It's actually formed into two pieces, and then they've welded them together along its length, and that's where we see the problem is right down here, right underneath the stem. So I'm going to go ahead and add pressure right now, and you can start to see their little bubbles will start to come in and form, and that's where the leak is. So barely visible, they're just right in here, and it'll start to lose pressure on the gauge up here. You can see it takes about 15 seconds, and I had it up in here in the 17-pound range, and it's slowly dropping as we go. So it just takes about 15 seconds and it'll lose all of its pressure. So clearly we have a problem with the radiator that has to be replaced. Let's go over to the shop bench and I'll show you what I've purchased. I went around this morning and did some calling around for parts. The dealership to replace the, well, what we're going to do is we're going to do some additional work as well as just the radiator. We've got hoses over here, upper and lower radiator hoses, as well as a new thermostat that we're going to put in and a new radiator cap. The dealership pricing ran about it's about $450, and it was going to take like a day to get this. I got this from my local parts house. Cost me $243, and that included a gallon of 50-50 mixed radiator fluid. So much cheaper, right? I mean, almost by half. So that's the plan. We'll go ahead and update in a minute. So we're into the disassembly, and one of the things that the Mazda manual doesn't mention is that the cowling underneath this vehicle needs to come off. And I've always hated doing this. It takes like 20 fasteners to get this thing off of here. It takes about 20 minutes, and you can see all this stuff needs to come off. I've used a nut driver and an air ratchet to do that. You can use just regular hand tools if you don't have an air ratchet. It's not a problem. It's just a little more cranking away with the tool. So you cannot get the lower radiator hose off without removing this. You can probably drain the radiator. There is a hole provided in the cowling for that, but you can't get the hose undone, so you can't get the radiator out, and you certainly can't remove the lower radiator hose and replace it. So it has to be done that way. So that's what we're into. Okay, I've removed the lower radiator hose. Actually, what I did before then was I drained the fluid out of the radiator. It's a real simple affair. There's a plug that goes right in the middle of the radiator, and you remove the plug with a Phillips head screwdriver. I did catch that material in this catch can, and I think that if you just let this run down your driveway and so forth, just completely irresponsible. This stuff is like highly toxic, and it will end up in the water supply. In addition to that, animals love this stuff. If you've ever been doing this kind of work, it has a sweet taste to it. If you get it splashed into your mouth, it has a sweet, it's very pungent smelling, so animals just go after this stuff like crazy. And if they get enough of it into them, and humans included, you will die a horrible death. So you need to catch that and get that recycled. Our city will gather this up for us, so that's how we handle that. So drained it, we've got the lower radiator hose off, okay? And now we're coming up to the top of the car, and I've made some changes here as well. This intake tube here, I just undid it from the actual intake and just kind of swiveled it over to get it out of my way. It just needed to be done because I couldn't reach and couldn't see very well. A couple other pieces and parts that came off. The upper radiator hose has been removed. There are two fans here on this assembly, and one of them is the cooling fan. One of them is the condenser fan, so in that order. And each one of them has a wiring harness that goes to it that has to be undone. And if you've messed with electrical components on cars long enough, they plug these things in all kinds of crazy ways, and you kind of sit there and study it and figure out how they got it to how their keepers actually work. So it was certainly the case here as well. The tube that runs over to the overflow tank has to be removed. And then what the book calls for, it almost implies that you remove the fans while this whole apparatus is installed in the car. I think that's a really bad idea. I'd much rather do this at the bench. So I made arrangements to, to do it in that fashion. There is one bracket that holds the air conditioning plumbing that is attaching it to the actual radiator and the fans and all this stuff. It's just one bolt, and, you just climb underneath and get it undone. So, I think that's pretty much it. And as far as the disassembly, I'm ready to pull this out of here. There are two clamps here that actually hold this on here. They're really tight. I mean, they were really, really tight. It took a lot of muscle to get them off, but this thing's ready to come out. I'll take a look at it. Over to the bench, and we'll take the fans off and put them on the new radiator. Well, if it were easy, everyone would do it. So here's the old radiator with the fans still connected to them. Here's the new one. And you can see that the new radiator has two parts that the old one doesn't have. It's this connection here and this connection here. And what that is an oil cooling line that goes to a transmission, automatic transmission. The car is a manual transmission. So it's late in the day here, and I'm not going to get this resolved tonight. So I can say that I did check the part kind of in general, and didn't really know kind of all what the fittings were going to be, and it looked right, and it actually is, except for those two particular connections. So this is all held up. We're going to have to get with the parts house and get that straightened around actually tomorrow. In the meantime, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to do the thermostat and the hoses. Okay, so I've made some phone calls to the parts house, and I'm not having much luck here. Apparently the automatic transmission radiators are readily available, but the manual transmission radiators are not. That being said, the difference between the radiator prices at the dealership and the aftermarket parts house is about $150, so it's a lot of money, right? In talking with the parts house, and he made a very good point, which let's talk about for a second. So come down here to the new radiator, and these are oil lines, right? So they cool the oil for an automatic transmission. The oil and the water and the transmission never actually mix, so it's a self-contained unit within. So the oil, I don't know, it goes into either one of these and it comes out either the other one, right? So what it does is it flows through and it cools off in the radiator and it goes back to the transmission, and it's kind of this closed loop. That being said, so there's no pressure, there's no water here, right? So what I'm saying is that I can actually install this radiator, leave those things just open without any hoses on them whatsoever, and it's going to work, right? So it's very, very tempting. It's not something that I like doing at all, but given our parts availability and pricing, I think we're going to go ahead and do that. All right, we are in the final stages of getting this operation completed. So everything's been put together. I've added a gallon of coolant to the vehicle. I've had it running for about 10 minutes or so, and I know that the thermostat has opened up because inside the radiator that water has become warm, and it won't do that until the thermostat opens. So I at least know it's partially open. It'll probably open up all the way when the car actually is driven and it gets up to operating temperature. What I've also done is I did the pressure test with the rental tool, and what I found was that there are no leaks in the car, but actually the adapter itself on the tool is actually leaking a little bit, and it's not unusual, I don't believe. So the pressure is dropping, but it's much slower than in the beginning of the project. And it's just because the adapter just doesn't fit together well. And you remember that needle was just, it was going to zero in no time flat. So we don't really have any leaks here. I've left the cowling off, and I'm going to do that at least until I've maybe driven the car around a little bit. I can't do too much because some of the bits and pieces under there might flap or might even touch a wheel or something. So I'll probably get in that tomorrow after I'm sure that and satisfied that there are no more leaks. So that completes the project.